She was just an ordinary woman. She wore ordinary shoes, had ordinary hair that never seemed to fall quite right, and an ordinary smile that didn't linger long enough to catch anyone's attention. When she walked down the street, she blended into the background, part of the everyday blur. No one noticed her much. No one truly knew what lay inside her. From 9 to 5, she sat at her desk, an ordinary employee in an ordinary office, mindlessly filling out paperwork, ticking off boxes and making sure the company's plans were fulfilled. To anyone watching, she was just another cog in the machine. All she had was a job she didn't even like. A job that made her feel smaller and more invisible with each passing day. But deep down, she longed for more. She didn't want to fade into the background. She wanted to be seen, to be heard. She wanted to matter, to be somebody. She dreamed of becoming a superhero, someone who could save the world. But where had this need begun? It started long ago, in a childhood she rarely spoke of. Back then, she had been the one in need of saving. She remembered the nights when she cried herself to sleep, the mornings when she woke up hoping someone would notice her sadness, her silence. But no one did. She learned early on that love was something you had to earn, and in the absence of care, she made herself invisible. Invisible, yet always watching. Even as a child, she saw the needs of others. Her mother, overwhelmed by life, barely making time for herself, let alone her daughter. Her father, distant and preoccupied with his own battles, never noticing the quiet ache in his child's heart. She grew up believing that if she could just make herself useful enough, caring enough, then maybe, just maybe, she'd be seen. But the recognition never came. So she became her own caregiver, her own protector. And as she grew, she carried that habit into adulthood, giving, loving, listening, always filling others' cups, hoping that one day someone would fill hers. For a long time, she didn't know where her overgiving came from. She could not trace it back to the little girl who just wanted someone to notice her, to ask her how she was doing, to tell her it was okay to be sad, to be scared. But instead of asking for what she needed, she gave. For years, she had been a healer for others, quietly mending their wounds, while hers remained hidden beneath layers of care and empathy. But something had started to shift in her. It was subtle at first, a fleeting thought here, a feeling she couldn't quite place there. It began one evening after she had come home from work, drained from the day's demands. She sat in her usual spot by the window, listening to the rain as it tapped gently against the glass. Her phone buzzed. Another friend asking for advice, another colleague wanting to vent. Normally, she would have answered right away, ready to listen, ready to give. But tonight, something inside her hesitated. She was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. An exhaustion that came from giving so much of herself, day after day, and never asking for anything in return. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she didn't answer the phone. She stared at it as it buzzed again, feeling a pang of guilt, but also something else, something unfamiliar. Relief. She let the phone go silent, resting it face down on the table. For once, She didn't rush to be the savior, the listener, the fixer. She let herself simply exist in the quiet. The rain falling softly outside, the world moving on without her involvement. It was a strange feeling. She had spent so long believing that her value was tied to how much she gave to others, that the idea of taking care of herself had never seemed like an option. But as she sat there, a thought slowly crept into her mind. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to start saving herself too. The next few weeks were a mixture of old habits and new thoughts. She still gave. She couldn't stop caring for others. It was too deeply ingrained in her. But there were moments, quiet moments, when she started to recognize the weight of her own needs. It happened one afternoon at the grocery store. She had just finished paying for a struggling mother's groceries, something she often did when she noticed someone in need. The woman's grateful smile warmed her heart, and for a moment, she felt the familiar glow of having helped someone. But as she walked to her car, a thought struck her. When was the last time I did something like that for myself? The question startled her. She couldn't remember the last time she had spent money on something she wanted, something that wasn't necessary or for someone else. The thought lingered in her mind as she drove home, a quiet whisper reminding her that while she had been saving others, she had been neglecting herself. That night, she sat by her window again, the same spot where she had spent so many nights contemplating her loneliness. But tonight was different. Tonight, she asked herself a new question. What if I started giving to myself the way I give to others? It wasn't an easy question to answer. The idea felt foreign, almost selfish. But deep down, she knew it wasn't selfish. It was necessary. Slowly, she began to make small changes. She started setting boundaries, learning to say no when she needed to, without feeling guilty. At first, it was difficult. The guilt of not always being available for others tugged at her. But with each no, she felt a little lighter, a little more in control. She started giving to herself in ways she had never allowed before. She began carving out time for herself, time to sit with her thoughts, to breathe, to reflect. She didn't always fill the silence with someone else's problems. Sometimes she let the quiet be just for her, and in those quiet moments, she started to heal. Instead of rushing to save others, she began guiding them to find their own strength. Helping no longer came from a place of seeking worth. It came from a place of choice, from knowing that she was worthy whether she said yes or no. She stood up for herself in ways she never had before, calmly but firmly facing disrespect. And then she did the unimaginable, something the old version of herself would never have dared. She quit the job that had dimmed her light, the one where her talents were dismissed and her efforts went unseen. She walked away from the place where she was mistreated and undervalued, and with that, she walked toward her own freedom. She built her own path, crafted her own rules, and chased her dreams. For the first time in her life, she was free, not tied to anyone's expectations, not seeking anyone's approval. She didn't need validation from anyone but herself. And in that freedom, she felt an overwhelming sense of pride. She no longer entertained people who couldn't see her worth, who took her kindness for granted. Instead, she surrounded herself with those who loved and cherished her for who she was. She no longer sought to save the whole world. She focused on healing her own. In doing so, she became the superhero she had always dreamed of. Not by rescuing others, but by saving herself. An ordinary woman who had the courage to save her own life. An ordinary woman who became extraordinary.